This is Only the Strong Survive, a podcast powered by Kahn Media, where we dive deep into the world of business, leadership, and innovation. I'm your host, Dan Kahn, and I'm honored to have you join us today. So, let's get ready to learn some survival skills together. Hey everybody, and welcome back to Only the Strong Survive. I am your host, Dan Kahn, and I am really excited for today's episode. Today I am joined by Brian Gilman, who is the CEO of Warriors and Quiet Waters Foundation. I got to know Brian a little bit. Our agency, Tread, does these experiential events about 3-4 times a year, and we did one about water access and fishing in Montana. And Brian's organization not only sponsored the event, but he and his guys came and spoke to our group, and we learned a lot about this really incredible mission-driven nonprofit that has a really, I think, an important role to play. So beyond that, we're going to get into Brian's background as a leader in the military and just going to talk about leadership in general. So I'm excited to have today's episode. And Brian, thanks for coming on today.
Dan, thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you.
You bet. So before we even get into Warriors and Quiet Waters, let's get some background. You've got a heck of a resume. You were a colonel in the Marines. I think you were the chief of staff for the Marine Forces Special Operations Command. So just give us kind of the rundown on your background, because it's pretty darn impressive.
Thank you. I'm a Montana kid. I grew up in Butte, Montana, 5th generation Montanan. My great-great-grandfather came here in 1864 as a pioneer. So I feel a very strong, connection to Montana, the land, and our family's history here. Butte, Montana is a blue-collar town. Grew up there. My dad worked for a mining company. My mom worked in various administrative jobs. Not a lot of money, but never went wanting for anything. Through my relationship with my dad, really became the outdoorsman that I am today. And that comes forward into Warriors and Quiet Waters. Got recruited to play football in my hometown at a college called Montana Tech. And during college was the Gulf War. And I had a couple high school buddies who had joined the Marine Corps right out of high school, and they both went forward and served in the Gulf War. That started inspiring me to serve. I also played football for Coach Bob Green, who was a Vietnam veteran, was a Marine radio operator in Vietnam. And Coach Green's leadership really further inspired me to want to serve. So right at the end of my college career, I called the recruiter in an effort to join the Marine Corps, and was lucky enough to be selected to go to officer candidate school about 9 months after I graduated from college. Joined the Marine Corps with the intent to serve 4 years, to make sure that I was serving that need to serve. And, quite frankly, like a lot of folks that joined the Marine Corps, to see if I had what it took to be a Marine, intending to come back after my 4-year tour to Montana, get a master's degree, and never leave Montana again. It turns out I came back 27 years later. I ended up staying in the Marine Corps for a 27-year career, primarily because I tell everybody I was an average Marine, because when I look at some of the Marines I served with, I was clearly average, but I was a pretty good Marine. And, I really learned that I enjoyed it. And once 9/11 happened, I was in it to stay. Talk about a sense of purpose. I found it immediately in the Marine Corps. I was a reconnaissance Marine and an intelligence officer in the Marine Corps. So I served about half my career in tactical recon billets in the Marine Corps, and about the other half in intelligence staff billets that brought me all over the world, all over the United States, including 2 tours to Iraq and 2 tours to Afghanistan. I was a reconnaissance company commander during the initial invasion in Iraq. Went back to Iraq 9 months later to Fallujah as the operations officer for that same battalion, 1st Reconnaissance Battalion. And then I deployed forward again in Afghanistan several years later with 1st Marine Division as the division intelligence officer, and then returned a year later as the commanding officer of 1st Reconnaissance Battalion, leading an entire battalion of Marines in combat operations in Afghanistan. Did a tour in Okinawa, Japan, then found myself selected to command the training center at Marine Special Operations Command, where I was responsible for conducting MARSOC's assessment and selection program, as well as all of its special operations training programs that we had in the command. Did that for about 2 years, and then was bumped up to be the chief of staff of Marine Special Operations Command, a billet that I was about a year into when I learned of this opportunity at Warriors and Quiet Waters, and retired from that posting to come here and lead this incredible organization I lead now.
Well, that's a heck of a career, and thank you for your service to our country. That's pretty cool.
Thank you.
Let's get into Warriors and Quiet Waters, because it's a really fascinating organization, and I think a much needed one. So can you give us a little background on the organization itself and its founder, and then kind of transition into your role there?
I sure can. So Warriors and Quiet Waters has been in existence for 17 years. was founded by another retired Marine colonel. His name's Eric Hastings, a Bozeman, Montana native who grew up, with that same draw to the outdoors and was an avid fly fisherman his entire life. Eric was a Vietnam era Marine. He was a combat pilot in Vietnam. He flew 168 combat missions during his tours in Vietnam. Lost several of his squadron mates during those deployments. And to hear Eric tell the story, when he returned home from combat in Vietnam, he came to Montana, went to the water with a rod in his hand, tied on a fly, and he found healing from his combat trauma through fly fishing. Eric went on to serve a 30-year career in the Marine Corps. He ultimately retired in 1991, right after the Gulf War. His last posting, he was the Chief of Staff of 1 Marine Expeditionary Force, which was the command that led all Marine forces in the initial Gulf War, the largest command of Marines ever assembled. And Eric was a key player in that formation. Retired, found himself back here in Bozeman in 2006, was on a fly fishing trip with his wife, Jean, in Canada. And Jean made a passing comment how she had wished that they could share this experience that they were having together with all these wounded warriors that were coming home from combat in the post 9/11 conflicts. And Eric told her that's a very interesting idea. Let's talk about that on our drive back to Montana. By the time they got back here to Bozeman, they had a plan, conducted a public meeting to put together a bunch of volunteers, figured out how they would deliver a program based on fly fishing to wounded warriors, and then flew down to Balboa Naval Medical Center and convinced the medical staff down there to put our first cohort of veterans on a military flight up here to Bozeman in 2007 to participate in our very first, what we then called the solo fishing experience. This was a week-long immersion in nature and fly fishing that was designed really to provide respite to these warriors that were coming right out of the military hospitals, respite from the stress and anxiety of that environment and their wounds and their transition out of the military, to connect them to other veterans who were experiencing the same things, as well as the volunteers that cared so deeply about them that participated in the program, because that human connection piece is incredibly important. Immerse them in nature, because we understood the incredible benefits that we receive from spending time in nature, and teach them how to fly fish, an immersive activity that you can continue to go to in nature to receive those benefits, and something that they could take home with them and continue to do forever. And that's how the organization delivered programming to our participants for about the first 14 years of organization's existence, was those week-long experiences. We added additional programming as we grew. We started a couples program because we recognized that not only the service members serve, but their family members did too. And for veterans to thrive, their families need to thrive as well. We created an alumni program so that we can continue to bring our veteran participants back to Montana, immerse them in nature, and keep engaged with them. In about the 2019 timeframe, our board of directors recognized that the veterans had changed over time since 2007. Their needs had changed, and that the organization had to adapt in order to maximize our impact. I joined the organization in 2020 with a mandate from the board to maximize our impact. So we spent the last 3 years really completely transforming the organization and the program model to what was a week-long experience in nature to what's now a 9-month-long program with week-long immersions in nature at the front and the beginning, everything else delivered remotely online, that's really designed to move veterans beyond healing from combat to truly thriving in their post-military lives, because we recognize that America needs our veterans to thrive. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to unleash thriving veterans on America, because they make America stronger. They make their families stronger. They make the communities that they live in stronger. They make the businesses that they work for stronger. And ultimately, they make our government stronger. And I think we can all agree that that's something we need right now, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. We chatted quite a bit up in at the event in Ennis. And tell us a little bit about some case studies. Can you explain some stories of how it works kind of for these vets and kind of what you've seen since you've been with the organization?
I sure can. So we'll start with nature. We're an organization that serves veterans through nature-based activities. I mentioned Eric and his experiences coming back from Vietnam and finding that through fly fishing. As I mentioned earlier, I'm a lifelong outdoorsman, grew up here in Montana. And I came here to the mountains in Montana following my combat experiences. And it was in the mountains of Montana, pursuing my passion, archery elk hunting, that I really was able to make meaning of the experiences that I had in combat, put them in a framework that I could move forward with, and really found my purpose in those experiences in nature. I lost 5 friends in combat, during my time in the service. They died in horrific, incredibly varied ways, and trying to understand that and make meaning of that was challenging. But, I did that here in the mountains of Montana, was able to finally make meaning of that and arrive to the conclusion that, my purpose in life going forward was to make the best use of the time that I have in service of others, the time my friends no longer have. And that's why I'm here today. So we understand the benefits that nature bring to us in order to solve challenging questions like that. I didn't understand why it worked. I just understood that it did before I got here to Words and Quiet Waters based on my personal experiences. But once I joined the team here, really started digging into the research about what nature does for human beings means, and it's pretty immense. I mean, there's a large body of research that supports this. It relieves our stress and anxiety because it lowers our cortisol levels. It increases our positive affect, our outlook on life, our hopefulness, because it increases our serotonin production just by spending time in nature. It even improves our immune function because it prompts the development of additional what are called killer cells, the cells in our body that fight disease and things like that. It ensures that we're more physically active. It improves our sleep. That's just the basics of just spending time in nature. And then when you take an immersive activity like fly fishing or photography or archery elk hunting in a nature-based setting, you get some additional benefits as well. The first is fly fishing is an immersive activity, but it keeps you lightly focused on the activity, which then allows your mind to wander. What it does is it engages what's called the default mode network in your brain, which are those areas of your brain that are most active when you're not hyper-focused on something, and it allows your mind to wander. And in the process of that, your mind is churning over problems, challenges that you've been contemplating over, the period of time preceding that. It also starts dumping dopamine into your system because it's an enjoyable activity. Those two things together, mind wandering and dopamine, make us more creative and better problem solvers. Have you ever had an epiphany in the shower or, driving down the road in nature?
Yep.
That's where that comes from. That mind wandering combined with that dopamine makes us more effective problem solvers. So we really try to use these nature-based activities to create the conditions in the veterans themselves, the psychological and the emotional conditions, for them to be ready to take on the challenging questions that we're going to throw at them through the rest of the program. Some good stories of what I've seen. I'll tell a short one and then I'll tell a longer one. A couple of weeks ago, we had one of our new 2024 Built for More cohorts here out on the water fly fishing one day at a really special place that we're able to bring warriors to near Bozeman. And in the course of a day, one of our warriors caught 53 fish.
Whoa.
On this small tailwater stream. And he told his volunteer companion that was with him at the end of that day that second only to his marriage and the birth of his child, it was the best day of his life. That's the impact that nature has. And then, he went back to the ranch that day. It was on a super high. On Wednesdays of every week, at the end of the day, we have a facilitated discussion called Why We're Here. And that's really when we bring the cohort together. And the purpose of that is really to cement a commitment from the warriors themselves to each other, the other warriors in the cohort, to do the hard work that's going to be required through the rest of the program. And the volunteer companion that was with him, seeing him on that high, coming out off the water, then going into that facilitated discussion and coming out of it, and his whole demeanor had changed. He now had a very serious look on his face. You could tell he was physically moved by the discussion that they had. And when he talked to him, the warrior told our volunteer companion that I wasn't sure what I was going to get out of this program until I went and had that discussion. And now I can see there are things that I need from this program that I never even knew I needed. I got a lot of work to do. And he's just starting on that process now. Another great story I'd love to tell you about is a warrior named Larry. Larry was a 30-year veteran in the Army, and 2 years ago was one of our first participants in our hunting program, Hunt for Purpose. And this came at a time where Larry was newly married. He was transitioning out of the Army, so his entire life was changing, and he wasn't sure what his future looked like. And seeing his cohort go through this 6-month Hunt for Purpose program, where we have them here in Montana 3 separate times, and seeing the physical and the emotional changes in these participants over the course of that 6 months was stark. I mean, we had participants that lost 30 pounds, got in the best shape of their lives. And then just seeing the intangible aspects of their demeanor, their outwardness, their ability to be open to new ideas, and their discovery of what a purposeful life looks forward over the course of this 6-month program was mind-blowing. One of my favorite pictures during that program was a picture of Larry on a mountain in the Bob Marshall Wilderness during his elk hunt, writing in his journal, really taking into account everything that he's learned. Long story short, Larry transitioned out of the Army, and now he works here at Warriors in Quiet Waters, helping warriors to thrive as a facilitator in our program. He's found new purpose and recognized what his life's purpose was going forward after the Army as a result of that program. We've had several of our participants that came through our program and did a total pivot in their lives, and they're now full-time professional fly fishing guides. That's where they find their purpose. So this is the kind of life-changing experiences we've seen happen as a result of our program. And we measure what we do. We partner with the Institute for Veterans and Military Families at Syracuse University. They do all of our impact evaluation. They collect data on our participants prior to coming through our program, several times through our program, and then immediate aftermath of the program to measure change over time in these areas of thriving and purpose that we're really trying to drive change. And we've seen incredible changes in terms of, tripling people's sense of thriving, doubling their sense of purpose, tripling their ability to sleep well, tripling their confidence in being able to solve the challenges that come their way. Every week I get to see these things, and, that fills me with purpose.
That's really impressive. So I completely understand the component of just being in nature. And as a person that, unfortunately, the trappings of modern life, and I'm not a vet and I don't have that life experience that your guys are going through, but just the day to day, like having every second of your life scheduled out and maximized and the efficiency cranked up in your phone and the internet and Zoom calls. And it's so much. I trail run every single day. And that is really the only time I have good ideas. The rest of the time I feel like I'm like going through the motions. Right. But if I can be even just under a blue sky, I mean, I usually live in the dark, but you know what I mean? Like if I can just be in fresh air around trees an hour a day, that's the best hour of my day. And so I totally get it. But it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like a component of your program also is fraternity. And in the more traditional sense of the word, not obviously like the other version of the word, but just giving these guys a group that they can bond with and they can lean on and they can connect with once they leave the service so that they still have those people they can kind of lean on. And is that the case? And is that a component of it?
That's a major emphasis area, and it's one of the pillars that we really try to build strength in our participants. And there's a lot of data behind why that's important. The needs of combat veterans are, the ones that we're most aware of are things like traumatic brain injury, physical wounds, amputations, gunshot wounds, etc. We hear a lot about post-traumatic stress. What's a lesser known need that just about every combat veteran experiences is this incredible sense of loss that they experience when they leave the military. A loss of identity, a loss of tribe and community, and a loss of purpose. So trying to rebuild that community and tribe for our veterans is a major aspect of our program. We also know from a study called the Harvard Study of Adult Development, which is an 80-year longitudinal study that's looked at over 700 participants over the course of their entire lifetimes. And it's a very rigorous study that has given them physical exams every year, conducted surveys, collected blood markers. And over the course of that 80-year study, looking at 700 study participants, this study determined that the number one driver of longevity and thriving for human beings is the quality and the strength of our relationships. So when you're a combat veteran coming out of the service where you had a team next to you every single day and you had these battle buddies that through the course of these incredible experiences you had in combat, you've created the most powerful relationships you've ever had in your life. And you always got a leader standing in front of you as well. And when you leave the military, all that disappears. You're still connected to them on text and phone and email, but it's not the same. You lose that sense of community. So rebuilding that sense of community through our program is a major thing that we're trying to do. And we really emphasize that, making that cohort strong together, as well as connecting them to the volunteers and the staff members that participate in the program as well. And then feed them into our alumni engagement program so that never ends. They always got a connection to the organization and the alumni in Wars and Quiet Waters. That sense of tribe and community is immense. And we work hard at creating an opportunity for them to build that in our program.
Well, I'd say you're doing God's work. That's a pretty incredible thing. Can you give us a sense of the scale of Warriors and Quiet Waters? How many people, volunteers, employees, what's the size of the organization? How many vets are you working with? And then where's it going? What's the plan?
We're still a relatively small organization, and, getting bigger is not the goal. Growing impact is. But right now we have 22 employees. A couple of them are remote employees. We utilize about 250 to 275 volunteers in our program over the course of the year. And these volunteers are committing an entire week of their life to the program. We use probably another 200 volunteers that help us out in the office, that help us on our events, things like that. Volunteers are a key aspect. They're the heart and soul of our program. We couldn't do what we do without them. And this year we'll serve 320 veterans in our programming. We had 4 times as many veterans apply to the Built for More program this year than we could serve. Our focus going forward is really increasing capacity so that we can get after this high demand, high need for our program. And there are a couple ways we can do that. We can serve bigger cohorts, larger cohorts at a time, and we can conduct more programming. And in order to do that, we have to grow some resources at our ranch, create more bed space, and we got to bring on some additional program personnel because our program's delivered through our people. We have staff members that are on the program the entire week, and that doesn't account for all the planning that happens before and after with those programs as well. We'll conduct 27 actual in-person weeks of programming here at Warriors and Quiet Waters this year. Starting in April, running all the way through November, we're pretty much running back-to-back weeks of programming. We just finished running 5 back-to-back weeks of programming last month. We had a week break, and now we got 3 more in a row. And it's going to continue that way all the way up until November. So it's a very fast-paced organization. Our focus going forward is really trying to grow our capacity. And then we also want to figure out how we can deliver the same types of impact to our family members as well. We have a family program called the Couples Program, where we bring couples here to Montana and immerse them in nature and fly fishing. We also have a caregiver program where where we're bringing military caregivers here to Montana, immersing them in fly fishing and nature as well. Those right now remain week-long experiences. Over the course of the next several years, we're going to transform those into long-term programs that deliver similar outcomes to what we're seeing in Built for More. So really delivering those types of outcomes to our family members as well is a big goal of ours. And then finally, figuring out what's next after the Built for More program. We believe we have an opportunity, once a warrior completes the Built for More program, to continue to accelerate that trajectory of personal growth and resiliency through a coaching program or mentoring program or something like that. So those are some of the big goals we're trying to accomplish over the next 3 to 5 years.
That's really cool. So as a nonprofit, where's the revenue come from? Do you have like commercial sponsors? How does the business side of the organization work?
It all comes through our fundraising activities. All of our operations are funded by private donors. The vast majority of them are individuals. We have multiple businesses and corporations that will sponsor our efforts as well. But it's all done through the fundraising work that my team and I do, reaching out and bringing believers into the organization that want to support us and want to provide these resources for us to deliver the impact that we do. There's multiple different ways that we pursue that, events, individual relationships with donors, working with corporations to sponsor, but it's all through individual fundraising activities. Our budget this year is $5 million. And it's going to remain at $5 million over the course of the next several years. So a cohort of veterans going through the 9-month Built for More program costs about $120,000. That's what we got to raise for every cohort we're putting through this year. I got an incredibly strong team that I've moved the goal line for them on fundraising every year that I've been here, and they've rose to the occasion. We're really at the point now where we have to expand outside of the market that we're currently in to bring in some new believers to really provide the resources for us to accomplish some of those goals that I talked about earlier.
Well, so we're going to get to this later in the show, but just for those that are listening, and I know we have a lot of business owners that listen to our show, this is a good place to investigate doing some CSR. This is a good organization. So if your business is looking for something to support, talk to Brian and his guys. One of the stories I heard from you guys up in Montana, and I'd love for you to share it with us, is tell us about the story about the ranch that you've acquired, because I think it's a really cool story.
From 2007 to 2014, all of our programming was done out of rental spaces. I mean, we'd rent out fly fishing lodges, we'd rent out Airbnbs in order to conduct our programming. The board recognized that if we wanted to do more programming, that wasn't a sustainable model. So they started looking for a home in about 2013. We found this place that's now called Quiet Waters Ranch. It's a property that's 9 miles north of Bozeman. It's right at the base of Bridger Mountains, 112 acres, a big lodge, what we call the Red Barn, which is our volunteer housing, and 3 fly fishing ponds on the property. We acquired that through a capital campaign that we conducted in 2014, and that's now our home base. That's where the vast majority of our programming is based out of. So we bring warriors to Quiet Waters Ranch. It's this incredible place that's dark at night. It's very quiet. It's got views of 5 mountain ranges right at the base of the Bridger Mountains. Just this really magical place where we hear warriors tell us, they come aboard Quiet Waters Ranch and they start feeling all that weight that they've been carrying shed off their shoulders as they get a fly rod in their hand and they're catching fish in our ponds. That's where we base the vast majority of our programming on. We're looking to expand our bed spaces there so we can handle bigger cohorts, and we got a plan for that moving forward as well. But the vast majority of what we do happens at this place called Quiet Waters Ranch. We do programming in Florida in the winter and in North Dakota, simply because it's really hard to fly fish in Montana in February. We deploy our staff to other locations to do our programming then. But our home base is this incredible place called Quiet Waters Ranch that we were able to acquire because of the generosity of donors that understood the value of giving us a place where we could do more for more veterans.
Yeah, and I assume having that as a permanent base gives you a lot more ability to kind of build it to suit and to really versus like an Airbnb where you kind of parachute.
Absolutely does.
Yeah, so that's really cool. So let's shift gears a little bit. You spent a long time in the Corps and you moved to the very highest ranks of that organization and led a lot of people. And now you've really done a real kind of pivot and you're leading a nonprofit. So we chatted a little bit about leadership up at the event, and then we've been emailing and talking about this show and mentioned I want to get into leadership conversations a little bit. And you did something no one has ever done before on this show. You sent over a leadership framework that, to be honest, kind of floored me. I saw this and I'm like, this needs to be like a book. So
it is a book.
Okay. Well,
We can talk about that.
Let's talk about that, because I want to know, kind of starting from the beginning, like, first of all, give us the rundown on your leadership framework, and then let's talk about kind of how you applied it, because I'm sort of stunned by this. It's basically an entire like leadership program on a couple pieces of paper. It's really incredible. So walk us through kind of where'd this come from?
My initial exposure to leadership happened when I was 14 years old. I earned a black belt in Taekwondo and became an instructor in my club. My first kind of dipping my toe into leadership there, as well as sports in high school. My immersion in leadership happened in the Marine Corps. Officer Candidate School, the basic school that every Marine officer goes through, which is a 6-month training program, is all about creating leaders. And they teach you how to lead the Marine Corps way. I use that as my baseline. And over time, serving in the Marine Corps over the course of 27 years, continuing to read, continuing to study, I collected a lot of leadership approaches from the business world as well. I found a book called The Leadership Challenge when I was in command of the Marine Raider Training Center at MARSOC back in 2017, written by a gentleman named Jim Kouzes. And this book impacted me as much as it did because it captured what I had found over the course of the previous 25 years worked in leadership. I connected with it because it connected with my personal experiences. Nothing that's in my framework is my own. Most of it's not my own. It's things that I've learned along the way. But this book, The Leadership Challenge, really encapsulated what I had learned over the course of 27 years in the Marine Corps, really worked in leadership. It all starts with an understanding of what leaders do. In my view, leaders empower others to do those things that need to be done that they would otherwise be unable or unwilling to do. That's what leaders do. They empower others to do hard things. It's not about giving commands. It's not about forcing people as a result of your power to do things. It's about inspiring and empowering them to do those hard things that need to be done. And then how do they do that? There are 5 different ways that leaders impact that. The first thing that they do is they model the way. They set the example for the rest of the team. If you're going to follow someone, you're going to follow them because you believe in what they do, how they act, etc. And it's incredibly important for a leader to model the way and set the example in everything that they do. The second thing that a leader does is they inspire a shared vision. For an organization to remain dynamic and continue to prosper, it needs to have a vision for the future and how it's going to compete in the environment that it's in. And a leader's job is to inspire that shared vision. It's not an imposition of their own vision. It's developing a shared vision within their organization from the people that are in it and getting everybody pulling in the same direction, pursuing that vision. They also challenge the status quo. Leaders exist to make sure that organizations remain viable, that they're able to accomplish their missions. Every organization's environment is constantly changing. So in order for you to remain relevant, you got to continuously challenge the process. You can't accept the status quo. In fact, I'll tell you, when I was interviewing for this job, I met with just about every board member in the interview process, and I asked every one of them the same question. I asked them, what kind of leader are you looking for? Are you looking for a steward to maintain the status quo, or are you looking for someone to drive change? Because if you're looking for a steward, I'm not your guy. I'm not interested in that. That's not what I want to do. And every one of them told me, no, Brian, what we're looking to do is to change and maximize our impact. So they understood the need to challenge the process as well. Then what leaders do is they empower others to act in accordance with that vision. They give them the tools, the resources, the guidance, the training that will make them successful, that will give them mastery in their job, will give them autonomy. They get to determine how they do their job, and will provide them an extreme sense of purpose in their job. And then finally, they encourage the heart. They recognize the wins of the individuals and the organizations. They recognize the people on their team as human beings and feed those things that fill their cup as well. As I read this in this book, Epiphany, I'm like, wow, this is everything that I've learned. I probably ought to write this stuff down. And that's how I came to this leadership framework. I consider myself a leadership practitioner. My cup's always half full as a leader. I'm always trying to learn. And as I've come across other things that really connected with me, I've pulled them into this framework as well.
Okay, that was a lot of info, and it was all excellent. So thank you. One of the things that stood out on the framework, and I'd like you to talk about and expand on it if you could, is a quote I've never heard before, and I've read it like 7 times trying to get my brain around it, which was, "The only privilege of leadership is leadership." Can you expand on that a little bit? Because I thought that was a really interesting thought.
It's actually a modification of a quote that comes from General James Mattis, Secretary of Defense Mattis. General Mattis was my division commander during the march up in Iraq. What General Mattis said is the only privilege of command is command. And really what he was getting at is that a leader, in order to be effective, has to sacrifice for the team. They have to serve the team. They're not there to collect the privileges that come with the position of leadership. The only privilege of command is the command. The only privilege of leadership is being in leadership. It's really easy to get in my view, really easy to get trapped with all of the things that come with a position of authority, the support you get from people, all those things that come with being the boss. It's easy to have that go to your head and really drive how you become, what kind of leader you become. General Mattis's quote is just a reminder that none of that matters when it really comes to the true purpose of leadership. And the only privilege you have of being a leader is that privilege of being a leader. And your job is to serve your team and empower your team and nothing more. That's where that came from, and that's what it means to me.
Well said. And it kind of made me think that it takes, I think, time for most people. I don't think there's a lot of people that just fall into leadership and go out and are great at it, right? And I've been on a journey, and I mean, heck, that's the point of this whole show. And I think it takes a lot of time for people to understand that short term, there are benefits, whether you like power or telling people what to do or the comfy corner office or whatever it is, but to really understand that there is gratification in helping other people and leading other people and watching them grow. And whether they stay in your organization or they go on to other things and new opportunities, the fact that you were able to help them, that is the benefit. Right. But it takes a certain amount of, I think, like you have to kind of keep your ego in check in order to realize that. And I think that's kind of the flip side of that challenge, right? Is as you move up the food chain, it's hard to do that sometimes. So
in a command style of leadership, doesn't work in every situation. Every service member in all the services in basic training is imbued to understand the ultimate necessity of following orders. And that's because the crucible of combat requires that. There are times where a leader has to look at a subordinate leader and say, take the hill. And there's no discussion about it. That's the mission. That's the job. There's no time to debate it. It's got to get done. But that doesn't work in every situation. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding that everything that happens in the military, that's how it works. People take orders and leaders give orders. And that's not what leadership in the military is about. That's what it's about in very certain situations when the requirements of combat require that. But that doesn't work, in every situation, especially in places where I serve, like Marine Special Operations Command, where you have the elite of the Marine Corps, the people that are in this command, and they're looking for a lot more from their leaders than just people telling them what to do. They want that autonomy. They want that mastery. They want to have a say in how things are accomplished. So finding a way to inspire an organization, a team around a future vision is incredibly important. And you can't do that through command. And, I've really learned that as I've transitioned from being a leader in the Marine Corps to being a leader in a nonprofit. It's an entirely different environment. Everything that I learned in the Marine Corps applies to my current role here at Wars and Quiet Waters, but its application is different. The teammates I have now are a lot different than the Marines that I had in the Marine Corps. They have different needs and desires. They have different expectations of their leaders, and being able to adapt to that environment, keeping in mind those 5 things that I talked about that leaders do and figuring out how to apply it in a different way has been an incredible learning experience for me over the past 4 years. That plus the fact that the power structure in a nonprofit is very diffuse. I report to a board of directors, 15 members of my board of directors. I am a fiduciary for all of our donors. All of our volunteers are stakeholders. So taking into account that broad swath of stakeholders in every major decision we make is something that I've learned is incredibly important in a nonprofit as well.
So that was actually something I wanted to ask about, and you just touched on it, but I wanted to kind of get back into it a little bit is there is certainly in the military, and especially I think probably in the Corps, there's power structure and a hierarchy. And I mean, if you've got an enlisted guy and you're a colonel, he has to listen to you, right? Now, it doesn't make you a good leader. That means he's at least going to listen to what you have to say. But you didn't transition into a hierarchical organization where everyone's just paid to listen. Because there's a version of that maybe in like a for-profit business, but you're not only running a nonprofit, you're running a nonprofit that it sounds like the ratio of volunteers to paid employees is like 10 or 20 to 1. So the majority of the people at an event that you're interacting with are volunteers. How does that apply? Because they're there because they want to be there purely, right? But you still have to be in charge, right? Like somebody's got to steer the ship. So how do you manage that so that they walk away, you're happy that everything's getting done, and they walk away feeling good about their decision to work with your organization and they want to do it again?
It all starts with trust. We're an organization that's fueled by relationships. The relationships that we have with our volunteers, our donors, our board members, and that all has to start from a place of trust. So, approaching every interaction with any of these stakeholders with the understanding that in order for us to continue to be effective, we can never violate that trust. So that means a lot of listening. It means a lot of storytelling. It means really exposing them to the magic that happens in our programming, hearing their feedback, being responsive to their feedback, and trying to incorporate incorporate that into our vision of the future. I've made no decisions of consequence here without consulting a large swath of stakeholders, because we have to, because the last thing I need to do is violate the trust of our volunteers. We can't do our programming without them. So providing them an experience that aligns with our brand promise every single time is something that we focus on every single day. Making sure that not only our warriors receive that, but our volunteers receive that as well, to ensure that when they complete a week of programming, it hasn't only changed the warriors' lives, it's changed those volunteers' lives as well. By the manner in which they were received, the tools that we've empowered with them with to be successful as a volunteer, and exposing them to what's happening in the program is what really makes that work for us, binds them to us as an organization, and has them come, inspires them to come back year over year. And we have volunteers that come from across the United States, paying their own way to get here to Montana to serve for a week of their life in our programming. Imagine that commitment. And like I said, we can't do it without them. So that's how we do it. It all starts with trust, a lot of conversations, a lot of listening to people, taking a lot of feedback and incorporating that into everything that we do.
I love that. And it's inspiring. One of the other points I wanted to ask about in your leadership framework that I thought was really interesting was a note that said, be wary of taking counsel of your or your team's fears or of naysayers. Can you kind of explain that a little bit?
This also came from some personal experiences that I had in the Marine Corps and here at Warriors and Quiet Waters. Ultimately, I think that a leader also has to be bold, that they have to have courage and they have to be confident in order to make the hard decisions that ultimately they're there to make. And at the end of the day, I believe you have to follow your instincts. You should listen to all of the guidance, all of the advice that you can receive from as many people as you can. But ultimately, you got to make tough calls. Just understanding that many people will approach challenges from the perspective of the problem rather than the perspective of the opportunity that lies on the far side of that problem. You just have to maintain a balance there. I always try to keep focused on where's the opportunity. Yes, I'm going to be told how hard this can be. Understand that. Got to take that into account. But what's the opportunity beyond that? Just being wary of, being convinced that something may be too hard to do is something that I try to keep mindful of, because at the end of the day, I'm here to make hard decisions. I'm here to achieve our vision, and that's going to be hard work. It's not going to be easy. And some of those calls are going to be tough calls that ultimately this organization is looking at me to make. And I just have to be very wary of, being afraid, not being confident in our decisions.
I love that. And it's interesting. I think our society could use a little more of that. It seems like people are afraid of hard things and, they're afraid of failing. So those choose to sort of not do the hard things. And that doesn't seem like it's leading us down a good path. I think maybe some of the best experiences I've had in my life came at the tail end of doing something that was really hard and maybe failing.
Everything meaningful that's happened in my life, for the most part, has happened as a result of something hard that I did. That includes my personal life. I have the best wife in the world and the best marriage in the world, but it's not easy every day. It's hard, but it's worth the work.
Yep.
I mean, it's the most important thing in my life, and I got to work hard for that. So, understanding the challenge is a part of what we do as human beings, and being able to rise to those challenges is incredibly important, I think.
Absolutely. Moving back to Warriors and Quiet Waters for a minute, both my grandfathers served in World War II. They're both combat vets. My dad, my uncles, most of his whole generation was in Vietnam, and I don't know if this is a perception or if this is true, but it seems like with prior generations, there was these groups of guys that would, serve, and they'd come back and then they just sort of put it in a box and don't talk about it. And it really just wasn't something that got discussed very often. And it feels like that's something now that's becoming more normalized, is that we can actually talk about these issues and we can talk about what these guys are going through. Are you seeing that? And is that the case? And what is in America, at least, what is sort of the awareness of veterans issues? And do you see it going into a better place? Like, where's this all headed?
To address the first part of your question, I hear those types of stories from so many people that had family members that served in World War II, Vietnam. They didn't talk about it. They didn't talk about it at all. Never came up. Kids discovering aspects of their parents' service, after they had passed, that never came up in the course of a conversation over the lifetime. In the post 9/11 experience, in my view, has been America, became aware of that and the actual effects of these traumatic experiences, and recognize the need for us to create space to people to make meaning of them. Making meaning of that comes through a lot of reflection. It also comes through working through that with other people. Never walking through those challenges alone. So I think that, as a society, we're more open to that now. The services have brought that on board, and they brought a lot of support to our active duty service members with ways to do that. Mental health support, peer counseling, things like that, because they recognize the bottom this stuff up isn't an effective way to deal with it. And one of the ways that I'll highlight, around the 2010, 2012, 13 time frame, we started hearing a number about veteran suicides. And that number was 22 veterans a day died by suicide. I was serving on the joint staff at the time, working in a job that existed to help veterans transition. So as we started digging into the data, the study that provided that number, 22 a day, what we learned is they arrived at that by collecting the death certificates of a sampling of states, 7 states, and they compared those death records with military records to identify the military suicides. In that time frame, back in 2010, 2012, 2013, the vast majority of those 22 a day were veterans that were aged in their 50s and their 60s. So they weren't the current era post 9/11 veterans. They were veterans from previous eras. And it had taken 20 years for those challenges to manifest into a suicide. The challenges of that combat veterans incur as a result of their service are varied. Every individual's experiences are different, but they persist for a long time if left unaddressed. And that's just borne out by those numbers that I just talked about. Those challenges vary from physical wounds to the unseen wounds to moral trauma to that sense of loss of identity, tribe, and purpose that everybody experiences when they leave the military. And they persist for a long time. We withdrew from Afghanistan several years ago. The needs of our post 9/11 combat veterans didn't end then because we're not hearing about all of these forward deployed forces fighting in combat anymore. It's a misnomer. We have about 160,000 service members that are currently deployed in combat theaters across the globe, and we always do. There's always service members forward in harm's way serving our nation's security. But those needs didn't stop when we withdrew from Afghanistan. I do believe that the needs of post 9/11 combat veterans are in the shadows of the American psyche right now. We're distracted by all the other things that are going on in our lives. I mean, we're in the middle of a presidential election. We know all the challenges that are happening overseas. The economy's forefront in everybody's mind. So it's totally understandable how that could happen. But the fact is the challenges that our post 9/11 combat veterans face didn't end when we withdrew from Afghanistan. They continue to persist today. And we have an opportunity to get left of that bang that we saw from those previous era veterans that manifested into suicide 20, 30 years later. And Warriors in Quiet Waters really approaches it from a perspective of we have to move combat veterans beyond healing from combat trauma to truly thriving. America needs thriving veterans. They make us stronger. They make stronger families. They make stronger communities. And that's really what we're trying to do. We're trying to unleash thriving veterans that make America stronger because our country needs it. We need a narrative of post 9/11 combat veterans thriving after their service. And I don't believe we have that right now. You look at the challenges that the military services are facing in recruiting. Last year, our services fell 34,000 recruits short. The only services that made their recruiting goals in 2023 were the United States Marine Corps and Space Force. Space Force only had to recruit 500 people, but the Marine Corps and Space Force were the only ones. We did not recruit 34,000 people that we needed. That's 5 brigades worth of service members that we were unable to recruit last year. And there's a lot of different reasons for that. You can look at the strength of the job market right now, the differing needs and desires of the younger generations. But I believe a big part of that is we don't see a narrative of veterans thriving after combat. We don't. And we need to. We need to demonstrate to our youngest generations that service in the military is valued and valuable. They're going to thrive after it as a result of it, because of it, not in spite of it. That's the narrative we need to create around veterans. We need veterans thriving because our national security depends on it. Ours is an all-volunteer force. And we need America's sons and daughters raising their hands to volunteer to serve.
Well said. And, I hope that as people like you and, there's other, Jocko and guys like that there's a lot of people, that are the entrepreneurship thing. It seems like it's having a moment where you're seeing a lot more vets that are kind of coming out in leadership roles, starting businesses, running organizations. And I think if we can keep a spotlight on that, that's a pretty critical deal. So well said. Okay. So last question. I ask this one in every episode. My life mantra is make every mistake once. And that is unfortunately the only way I learn is the School of Hard Knocks. So as you think back over your career in the military and then at Warriors in Quiet Waters and just over your life, what's the biggest mistake you made and what did you learn from it?
I think the biggest mistakes I've made from a leadership perspective are when I lost sight of my framework. I'm the kind of person who is, I'm very type A. I like getting things done. I like getting things done quickly. I like solving hard challenges. When I don't show up as my best self, what that looks like is I become overbearing. I don't listen to others. I take over, all those things that my framework says that I shouldn't do. And when I think of the biggest mistakes I've made as a leader, it's because I've done that. Because of some outside pressures that I had, or, I was having a bad day, something like that. And really what that did was I harmed that teammate in some way. And I took away some of that mastery, some of that autonomy, some of that purpose. And I've learned that some of the most important words a leader can ever say to his or her team is, I screwed that up. And here's how. And here's what I'm going to do in the future to not do that. When I think about the mistakes I've made as a leader, that's where it came from, where I lost sight of how I should really lead and let my inclinations take over and show up as, not my best self as a leader. I can think of 5-6 times I've done that just here at Warriors and Quiet Waters. But I will tell you, when I stood up and said those words to my team, when I sat down with a teammate and I said, I'm sorry, here's how we're going to make sure that doesn't happen in the future, the bond between me and that teammate's grown only stronger. You have to have the humility to admit that you don't have all the answers. Leaders aren't expected to, and they shouldn't be expected to. None of us are smarter than all of us together. And I tell my team all the time, I'm not interested in being right. I'm interested in getting it right, and I need your help to do that. And when I've made mistakes, it's when I've forgotten that. And I've tried to take over. I've become overbearing. I didn't listen to people. I treated them in a way that wasn't respectful. That's the biggest mistakes that I've made over the course of my leadership experience.
Really well said. And, it took me 15 years of leading a team before I got to a point that I could say, I'm sorry. But you're right. It is a powerful thing, and I think sometimes what people forget is that leaders are human too. And sometimes, you have an argument with your wife on the way out the door, or, there's something going on at home, or you scuff your front bumper when you're parking and you're in a bad mood and you come in and it's just like, we're allowed to be people, but, you got to own it when you kind of deviate from that framework. So really well said. Brian, this has been phenomenal. Let everyone know, how do they learn more about you and about Warriors and Quiet Waters, and how can they get involved?
Yeah, best way to learn more about Warriors and Quiet Waters is go to our website, and it's www.wqwf.org. That tells our story. We're also on Instagram, LinkedIn, great ways to actually see video stories of our programming. We have incredible photography of our programming. A picture tells 1,000 words. So those are the best places to learn more about us.
Excellent. I highly encourage you guys out there listening to check it out. It's a great organization and they're doing great work. That is the end of today's episode of Only the Strong Survive. Thank you again to Brian Gilman for joining us today. And let me know what you think by rating this on the podcast platform you're listening to. We also post these videos on YouTube, so make sure you like and subscribe at OTSS Podcast. Likes, comments, and follows really help the show. So thank you again, Brian, for joining us, and I hope everyone has a great rest of their day.